Hi everyone, I'm Heath Hightower, co-host of Process Recordings. Before we get started with today's show, I want to just give you a quick reminder. While Lisa and I hope you find our show useful, we also want you to know that it's not a substitute for therapy. If you do need a therapist, however, we do recommend that you check out the psychologytoday.com website. Also, if you need immediate support, contact 988, which is the 3-digit number to contact the National Crisis Hotline and Suicide number. Thanks for listening and watching, and enjoy the show. Hi everybody, I'm Heath Hightower.
And I'm Lisa Wessan.
And welcome to Process Recordings. This is the show where we have real talk about real human concerns, as well as real talk about solutions, tools, and techniques to overcome all of life's difficulties. Welcome. It's good to be with you, Lisa.
Yes, good to see you too.
Yeah.
Summer's treating you well.
Summer is treating me really well.
Great, yeah. Thank you. And I'm excited about our topic today because we're going to be unpacking ideas about shame. Many, many levels, like more than 50 shades of shame, so to speak.
Yeah. Lisa and I were having conversations about what we wanted to talk about. And one of the things that just percolated right to the top was this whole concept of shame, this lived experience of shame. There's a lot of confusion about what shame is, what it's not. So we thought we would shine a bright spotlight on it and spend some time talking about it with each other today. And we hope you guys out there get some good insights about what shame is. And then we'll also talk about some things that we can do about it. So
yes, we're solution focused. And we offer tips. We like having tips and techniques and methods, and I like acronyms that help. Also, I think when we had this pre-show meeting, I really appreciated your distinction. Why don't you share with the audience, our viewers, the difference between shame and guilt?
Great.
Because that's a really important aspect.
Yeah, that's really important. So thank you for that prompt. So when we think about shame, we often conflate it with guilt. So the easiest way to think about the difference is that guilt is that emotion we feel when we've done something specifically wrong. So for example, if I cheat on a test and I have a belief that cheating is bad, if and when I cheat, I'm going to feel bad, right? Shame is different. Shame isn't just that I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. The other distinction that I would also want to make is that there is also a difference between shame, which is the individual internalized experience of being bad, with shaming, which is something outside of the person that is communicating in some way, shape, or form that the individual person is bad.
Yes, thank you for that. And also, we're going to explore what's known as toxic shame. You know, and recently I've come across the term chronic invalidation, chronic traumatic invalidation, which causes shame when, parents or whoever is constantly saying over and over, what's wrong with you? And that has an effect on a child or a teenager,
Yeah.
The chronic anything, but, especially when it comes to shame, and it becomes a serious mental issue.
Right. Yeah, and just to say a little bit more about the connection between shaming and shame. So when we think about shaming, really it's any action outside of the person that is communicating that the person themselves is bad. So it could be social media. It could be a parent who is telling you that you're constantly bad. It could be a partner or spouse. It could be a friend. It could be an uncle. It could also be the broader culture. is telling you that something fundamental about you is unacceptable or bad. So there's lots of vectors, there's lots of ways in which people can receive the message and then internalize the message that they are bad, that they existentially, that everything about them in some way, shape, or form is bad.
Yeah, that reminds me of a saying I've heard, helping people learn to validate themselves better is, I made a mistake here. If someone had a true made a problem error, but I am not a mistake.
Right.
I'm still a worthy, beautiful, powerful person,
Right.
even though I make mistakes. And I've come to find out that, in my current older age, like I fail forward all the time. I make mistakes. And if I'm not taking enough risks, I'm not making any mistakes. So I like to fail and have perfectly imperfect progress.
Right.
Progress, not perfection. Versus when I was younger, I really thought that I was supposed to be perfect. And in school, when you're in school, how many of you think that, straight A means you're a good great, and if you get B's and D's or C's, you're not good. The self-worth gets reflected in a metric, which is not right.
Right.
And
it's hard and I think that you are absolutely right about that. There's a way in which our culture keeps shame scores, if you will, objectively. So whether it's what weight you're at, or what size you wear, or how tall or short you are, we even keep score in terms of people's physical attributes, like, do you have big breasts? Do you have small breasts? Do you have a large penis or a small penis? So there are all of these really objective ways. Yeah, that's right.
Colorism.
Yeah. So depending on what shade of skin color you are, there can also be these value judgments about who you fundamentally are as a person. And so our culture sends all sorts of messages about where you fall on all of those metrics, which means there's lots of opportunities for people to be shamed as well as to internalize shame, which is why I think it's probably one of the silent reasons why people come to see us.
Yeah.
Right? People might say, I'm here because I'm depressed or I'm anxious, but underlying most of that anxiety or most of that depression or the grief, there are often these really entrenched, powerful, shaming dynamics that keep people stuck.
Yes. And I have a folder in my work, which is going to be a chapter in my book called, the compare and despair syndrome.
Yeah.
And especially now with social media and Instagram, I recently read this wonderful book by Dr. Daniel Amen. He's a psychiatrist. Your brain is always listening. And I don't know if he coined the term, but he talked about Instasham. Instascam. Instasham. He says that, with people, nobody ever puts pictures on there of like sitting on the couch, depressed, eating a bag of potato chips, like with greasy hair and like laying there like a dead one. I mean, maybe some people are starting to actually be more authentic, but Instasham is like such a lot. People have their happy reels. And then people who are not feeling well or a little under the weather, they look at that and they go, oh, my life is terrible. I didn't go to Paris. I didn't do this.
Right.
And the compare and despair is brutal, and in person and also online.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. And when I think about one of the number one behaviors that people engage in when they feel shame is they avoid and isolate, right? Because if you think about it, shame is I feel bad about myself. So if I'm in a social setting, I don't want other people to see my badness, right? I don't want other people to point out my badness.
Well,
and so what people often do who are feeling shame is they avoid and isolate.
I was going to say the isolation is one of the major causes, and then they go into their addictions. They start eating or drinking or drugging or porning, whatever they do. It adds on. They get an add-on from the shame at home. So something I want to share with you today and our listeners is that there's an acronym. I didn't make this up. It's called SHAME. SHAME stands for should have already mastered everything. And I love that because I share that with my clients. I say, nay. Who says at the tender age of whether you're 20, 30, 40, 60, whatever, that you're supposed to be an expert or be perfectly organized or perfectly whatever, and to give yourself a break. So the shaming, the self-shaming and the shoulding, shoulding on oneself, SHOULD, is brutal.
Right.
So a lot of the work that we do is helping them catch the language. Good self-talk is the beginning of self-care, and stop it, and catch themselves when they say mean things to themselves.
Right.
And put the shaming language, I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have known better, I should have gotten a better job, shouldn't have married that person, whatever. When we argue with the past, as Byron Katie says, when we argue with the past, we lose, but only 100% of the time. So the shame we feel for our mistakes it's obviously unhealthy. And one of the challenges is to go back and have compassion and ultimately forgive ourselves and also others who have been naughty or mean with us,
Right.
Right? Because that's shame. That's where the shame comes from. It's like, oh, I should have known better. What's wrong with me?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. There's something really insidious about shame, because you may start to feel shame because of one thing, but then it cascades and you start feeling shame about other things.
Yes.
And then it even gets to the point where you start feeling shame about feeling shame, right? The shame of being ashamed, which is really, really, really damaging to people. I think we see that a lot in the work that we do with people.
Yeah, you're right. It compounds.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
So let's see. So you wrote a very interesting paper.
Oh, thank you.
About the Black female population.
Yeah.
Do you want to share with us about your findings?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's really worthwhile.
Yeah. So back in 2021, I did a research project where I interviewed 14 Black female clinicians across the United States. And the question that I was asking them in particular was, how did they understand suicide in their communities? The reason why I spoke to Black female clinicians is because they are Black females, they occupy a very precarious place in our society. They face multiple forms of discrimination, which they are often shamed for being a woman, shamed for being too Black, shamed for being too successful within their own communities sometimes. And also, because they're in their communities working as mental health professionals, they also have unique insight into the degrees to which suicide in Black communities is related to mental illness, or to what degree is it related to social pathologies like anti-Black racism and discrimination. And one of the things that came through in this qualitative work was that they identified overwhelmingly that there is anti-Black shaming that exists in this country that is, of course, related to historical and intergenerational anti-Black trauma that gets communicated in our laws. It gets communicated in our social media. It gets communicated in our public media. It gets communicated in our interactions with institutions and our social structures. And that trickles down, that anti-Black shaming really trickles down and can get internalized into people in Black communities and really contribute to their sense of despair, which oftentimes is what catalyzes a suicide attempt. So that's what we found. Now, the other thing that I found, which I think is also important to note, is that suicide mediates, which is to say compounds, other emotional experiences also associated with suicide, like depression, hopelessness, anger, anxiety, guilt, violence, etc. And so it is important for us to know that shame isn't just a problem in and of itself. It can make, and often makes, other emotional challenges that you're having even greater. It really augments it. It really exacerbates it. And so one of the things that I really kind of learned from working with these 14 Black female clinicians was that when we think about suicide prevention, we can't just be thinking about it at the micro level, the individual level. We need to be looking at the ways in which the systems that people are embedded in are sending anti-Black shaming messages, as well as exacerbating things that people might be just experiencing at the individual level, but then they get magnified.
Thank you for that. And as you said in your paper, it's not just with that population, yes, but also the LGBT community,
right,
and also the certain ethnic communities like the Jewish community. It happens. It's pervasive in our culture.
Right.
That there's a shaming going on.
Right.
And I once heard the psychiatrist, Gabor, I forget.
Oh yeah,
Dr. Gabor talk about that. He was saying at this lecture that we seem to have a need to project onto the other our own shadow stuff and put others down, whether they're gay or Black or Jewish or fat. There's some parts that when someone hasn't dealt with their own, the shadow is the part of us that is kind of not healthy, and we could do a whole show on the shadow stuff. But the part of us that's kind of not unconditional. It's a very critical, condemning, dark side that's very complicated and often hurtful. So anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah. So Gabor was just saying how some people have a need that the unhealthier that when a person hasn't just reviewed their own internal debris and shadow stuff, they project it onto others. The idea is you spot it, you got it. For instance, so when someone doesn't want to deal with their own stuff, they hate others even more virulently. My favorite example of the you spot it, you got it is how in politics, how many times have we seen a congressman who's passing all these anti-gay laws and he hates the gays and he's anti, and then he's found in a men's room with a guy or a transvestite, whatever. And it's like, there it is. He cannot do, he's a latent homosexual. He's completely stuffing it down. And what does he do? He hates gays because he hates himself. And then he's found in a bathroom. So that's the, you spot it, you got it problem. And this happens ethnically and on many levels. Obese people, someone who hates the idea of themselves being fat, they hate fat people. So we do this in our culture. It's pervasive.
Right.
And unfortunately, certain cultures like the Black community and the Jewish community, the Indians, there's been so many persecuted communities. I'm not going to list them all, but it's the pattern. It's the pattern,
Yeah, and I think what you said there is really important and should be emphasized, which is oftentimes
Shaming. What
we see is that underlying this shame experience is power and a power dynamic, right? That people with power oftentimes use that power to oppress other people. And one way to oppress other people is to shame them for who they are, to otherize them, to encourage other people to otherize those communities, so that those communities will remain oppressed. And so the act of shaming is an act of an abuse of power meant to perpetrate harm on somebody else intentionally.
Yes. So what I'm hearing you say, it's a way they legitimize control.
Right.
By shaming a whole community.
Right.
And passing laws.
Right.
To verify themselves.
Right.
Which is really complicated. And
yeah.
I have to say my brain sometimes fries when I think about some of the laws that have been passed recently, taking away certain people's rights and the attempt to take away people's rights. So anyway, we're not going to get into politics right this minute, but the interesting thing is how do we when people talk about this, how can we help serve them in untangling this relentless shaming that is, they're innocent of it. It was put upon them. And, I guess, we're going to have a second episode where we discuss more of the tips and techniques and methods we use to help. I think of myself as a shame buster. People come to me, it's like, we've got to get rid of this shame. It's killing you, But that's one of the solution things. How can we help people and help our audience? Maybe they'll never see a therapist. How can we help them now to learn how to diffuse that shame? And what is the antidote? What is the medicine? What is the helpful intervention? Because it is pervasive.
Right. Yeah. And, I think that one of the important things as people are beginning to think about shame and how shame operates in their own life is to really start thinking about the relational contexts in which their shame is happening. Because that's the other important thing about feeling shame. Shame always occurs in the context of relationship, either with another person, another group of people, a relationship with an institution or another community, one's relationship historically to other groups and communities. So I always think that it's important that if you're feeling shame, which is usually a combination of sadness and anxiety that is connected to you feeling bad about who you fundamentally are, that's usually how you know you're in the land of shame, is if you are feeling those two primary emotions, anxiety and sadness or depression, and it's also connected to some fundamental thing about you that you have been told is bad.
Yes. And you're reminding me of someone, God, from pre-graduate school. Did you ever have John Bradshaw? He talked about the inner child and family. He was big on family dynamics and the identified patient and family. He was big on roles.
Right.
And so it's very often the case that in some families, somebody's identified as the patient or the sick one. And no matter how healthy they get, and the family continues to treat them like a sick person. Maybe somebody had a drug issue or an eating problem and they end up in a psych hospital for a while, rehabbing it, and they come out and they get better and their life is working, but the family still treats them like they're very sick and makes fun of them and teases them. And there's a whole dynamic being in that role. It creates role conflict when someone gets well, but the family still treats them like sick.
Right.
And that's another kind of shame where it has to be addressed. What I do is I have a family meeting, to clean it up. But the family, some families need to have like a little scapegoat or someone they can blame things on.
Right.
And when there's nobody available, then they can't handle it. Right. They're used to having so-and-so be the sick one. Now they're going to face their own issues,
Yeah. When you think about shame as it plays out in your own work with clients, I'm wondering what are some of the more common presenting concerns that people come to you with that might not be specific to shame, but oftentimes when you start doing the work, you start identifying that shame is really at the root cause of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We still have a few minutes. Because I work with I teach dialectical behavior therapy skills. Right. And in my DBT groups, I've had the honor and privilege of having many people come in who have some serious diagnoses. Some of them do, not all. And they come and they present as overweight or bipolar or borderline, or they have a history of meltdowns that cause them to be rejected from schools, whatever, what's it called, being expelled even, like that kind of thing. Years ago it was more, not so much now. I don't work with teens anymore. But anyway, what I've noticed is like underneath all the drama is a core of deep shame and unworthiness. And like the question is, like I always think like the person comes to me like their self-worth is below sea level. We want to get it to at least sea level and above sea level, And how do you do that? That's the question. And how do we help them as therapists feel good, that they're good enough as is, and that also everything that happened in the past, we have to look at it as they did the best they could, given their skill set and who they had and what medication they were taking or not taking. Everything that happened prior to this treatment process, we let go of it. They cannot look back and go, oh, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have that. And the shame, so they become feeling good enough as is. And that's it's really the headliner. Like, how does someone feel good, more healthy self-worth, even though their life isn't perfect?
Right.
Even in size 3X dress or, 52 jeans for a guy, whatever, like when someone's morbidly obese, how can I help them feel really good enough as is? Right. And that's important because underneath all of this is often, even depression and anxiety, a lot of it's low self-worth.
Sure.
Yeah. And the labels, we want to disable the labels, because I always tell people, when you have a label, again, especially the bipolar borderline thing, it's useful only for insurance reimbursement and if you need medication or special treatment. But to call yourself, I am a bipolar person, or even saying I am an alcoholic, I often question that. Even like the identity is so strong. I like people to say I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm a recovering food addict. Don't say I am a food addict, because that can kind of perpetuate it.
Sure.
And so anyway, that's another topic for another show. But when people have to change their identity very often on a deep level to not feel the shame anymore.
Right. Yeah. And the way that I often think about that very question with my own clients is, we would never say I am cancer.
Exactly. Oh, I love that.
We would say I have cancer, right?
Yes.
It's a part of who I am, but it's not all of who I am. And
the identity.
Right. And so I do think that just that little linguistic shift from I am to I have. So I have bipolar disorder, or I have I have a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. That little shift in and of itself starts to shift the internal structure of people's identities.
Absolutely.
Because they go from something that is essentializing about them. When you say I am something,
that's right.
When I say that I am a man, I am simultaneously saying I am not a woman, right? Like, language is really powerful. And so I do think those small modifications can be a good first step in helping people kind of shift away from shame.
Right.
As I was listening to you talk, I was also aware that in the work that I do with clients, that there's oftentimes a great deal of shame around trauma, especially male trauma survivors, especially if that trauma was a physical or sexual trauma. And I think one of the hardest parts about working with clients who have those kinds of presenting concerns is that their own bodies oftentimes reinforce shame. So, for instance, when I have worked with male sexual abuse survivors, sex is pleasurable. Like, there is, like, if you touch people in certain parts of their body, it is going to register as pleasure. And at the same time, that pleasure response is happening in the context of a non-consensual, violent act by somebody else who is exercising their power on your body. And so that can be a real dilemma psychologically for people, because they often say to themselves, well, I must have liked it because it felt good.
That's very important. And we're going to be wrapping up soon.
Yeah.
So we'll continue this more in the next episode. And I think the relabeling, the language is so important, and learning how to learn the words. I have we'll talk about the endearments. I have people learn to give themselves endearments. Like mine happens to be darling girl. But learning how to talk to yourself like you're a struggling child with some problem, in order to move through it and give yourself permission to feel. And I have some tips and techniques on how to, this certain body touching you do for yourself to get over shame, and the words you use, and how you can describe yourself to yourself. And it becomes, it starts out artificial, but then it becomes true. It can feel, it doesn't always feel normal to say.
Fake it until you make it.
Right. It's the fake it until you make it. It's very paradoxical, but it's powerful, So I want to thank you, Heath, for doing this show with us today. We are here. This is Process Recordings, and I'm Lisa Wessan.
And I'm Heath Hightower.
Yes, and we're going to continue this journey in another episode on shame, because there's a lot to say about shame. And we have 53 seconds. Anything else you want to add? Yeah,
I just want to remind people that if you're feeling this way, it is typical to feel shame. And the best thing that you can do is start thinking about it and talking about it more, because that starts the healing process.
Yes, and I love that. There's no shame in this game. Talking about shame is going to help you grow, learn, and serve on a higher level of consciousness. So that's the beauty of this. We get past it, and all of us have experienced shame.
Yeah.
I read Michelle Obama's memoirs last year, and I was amazed at some of the shame she experienced. She talked about in that book, things she should have done better. Like, I'm not doing enough. Like, what? So we'll talk about that. It blows my mind how it's a universal feeling, actually, but some people have the deep, deep levels of it. Good health is wealth. Everybody, you go for it. You go for it. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Process Recordings is produced by Heath Hightower and Lisa Wessan, with technical support from Chelmsford TeleMedia, the community media center of Chelmsford, Massachusetts.